Welcome, seekers of the strange and the unexplained, to Untold Stories, the channel where we uncover the chilling tales that history tried to bury, but the whispers of the past refused to stay silent. Today, we bring you a story that will make your skin crawl and your heart race. It's a tale of a cat unlike any other, a creature that walks the line between life and death, between protector and predator. This is the Harbinger, a story so haunting, it'll leave you questioning every shadow and every purr. In this episode, you'll meet Shadow, a mysterious feline whose presence foretells doom. But is it a messenger of death, or something far more sinister? You'll have to watch to find out. And trust me, you don't want to miss a second of this. So, if you're brave enough to face the unknown, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell, because Untold Stories is just getting started. Oh, and don't forget to smash that like button if you're ready for a scare. Your support keeps these stories alive, and trust me, they're dying to be told. Now, let's step into the darkness together. Welcome to the Harbinger. I've worked at Willowbrook Nursing Home for 12 years, and over that time, I've seen my fair share of things: sick residents, heart-wrenching farewells, and even moments of unexpected joy. But nothing could have prepared me for the day the cat showed up. It started one autumn evening, just as the orange leaves fell in the wind and the nights began to grow colder. I was doing my usual rounds, walking through the dimly lit hallways, checking on the residents, when I saw it. A tabby cat, its yellow eyes glowing eerily in the soft light, sat perfectly still in the middle of the corridor. No one knew where it had come from, it just appeared, as though it had always belonged there. Silent, watchful, unblinking. I remember feeling a strange chill run down my spine as I passed by it, but I dismissed it. After all, a cat in a nursing home wasn't exactly unheard of. We decided to call it Shadow, mostly because of the way it seemed to blend into the shadows. Its fur almost identical to the dim light around it. The residents, many of whom had no family left to visit, took a liking to it almost immediately. They'd stroke its soft fur, and it would curl up beside them, purring like a contented little companion. At first, I thought nothing of it. It was just a cat, after all. But then, something strange started to happen. Shadow began to behave differently. It wasn't the playful, affectionate cat that we had first met. No, it became distant, cold, and oddly ominous. It would sit in the corners of rooms, its yellow eyes trained on certain residents, watching them for hours. The worst part? Those residents began to pass away soon after. It started with Mrs. Thompson, a sweet woman, always smiling, despite the pain that came with old age. One night, Shadow sat next to her bed, just staring at her, its unblinking gaze fixed on her face. The next morning, she was gone. Peacefully, as if in her sleep. Everyone thought it was just a coincidence. But then Mr. Jenkins passed. Same thing. Shadow had been near him that night, watching him silently. A few hours later, he was gone too. At first, the staff chalked it up to the natural course of things: people come, people go. But soon, we couldn't ignore the pattern. Every time Shadow lingered near a resident, within a day or two, they would pass away. I tried to brush it off as superstition, but the more it happened, the more unnerving it became. There was no denying the connection. One night, I was working late, finishing up in the common room. It was just me and Shadow. The cat was perched on the windowsill, watching me with those glowing yellow eyes. The air felt heavier, colder. I reached for a glass dish on the table, and for a moment, I felt like the room had become utterly still. Shadow's gaze shifted to the dish in my hands, and I could swear its pupils dilated, growing larger and darker. I don't know what happened next, but the dish exploded. Not just shattered, exploded. The glass flew across the room like bullets, embedding itself in the walls. I ducked behind a chair, my heart hammering in my chest. I could hear the shuffling of feet as the residents, who had been dozing in their rooms, rushed to see what happened. But when they came, the only thing they saw was the wreckage, the jagged shards of glass scattered across the floor, and the empty windowsill where Shadow had once sat. I tried to explain what happened, but who would believe me? A cat made a dish explode just by staring at it? It sounded like madness, and I felt like I was losing my mind. But deep down, I knew that something wasn't right. I could feel it in the air. The cat wasn't just a harbinger of death, it was connected to it. The next morning, Shadow was curled up next to Mrs. Abernathy, a woman who had been with us for years. A part of me wanted to warn her, to tell her to stay away from the cat, but what could I say? I had no proof. I watched as Shadow's eyes gleamed faintly, its purring vibrating through the air, and my stomach turned. That night, Mrs. Abernathy passed away in her sleep. By now, the staff was on edge. Some quit, refusing to stay in a place where a cat seemed to hold such power over life and death. But I couldn't leave. Not when I was so close to understanding what was happening. I had to know the truth. Was Shadow merely a supernatural observer? Or was it something far darker? Then came the night that changed everything. I was in the basement, restocking supplies, when I noticed something strange. Paw prints, large, far too large for any normal cat, were etched into the dust. I followed them, my breath catching in my throat, until they led me to a corner of the room. There, in the dim light of a flickering candle, sat Shadow. But it wasn't the same cat I had seen before. Its form seemed to flicker, like a shadow in the wind, shifting between something too large to be a cat. It was growing before my eyes, expanding until it was the size of a dog, then a tiger, its eyes now burning like twin flames. I froze, my legs shaking. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The air around me grew thick and suffocating. Shadow let out a low, guttural growl that echoed in the basement, vibrating through my chest. Then, in the blink of an eye, it was gone. I bolted upstairs, my heart racing, only to find the common room in chaos. A vase had shattered, glass flying everywhere. The residents were in a frenzy, some clutching their chests, others weeping in fear. I knew what was coming. That night, 3 more residents passed away. I finally understood. Shadow wasn't just predicting death, it was causing it. Each time something shattered, it was a warning. The cat had chosen its next victim. And now, it was escalating. I had to stop it. I had to do something. I confronted the nursing home director the next day, begging him to do something about the cat, but he dismissed it all as coincidence. "It's just a cat," he said with a laugh, trying to brush off my fears. But I knew better. I had seen what Shadow could do. This was no ordinary cat. That night, I made my decision. I would trap it. Maybe even kill it, if that's what it took to stop the deaths. I set a cage in the basement, baited it with food, and waited. Hours passed. My eyes grew heavy with fatigue, but I refused to leave. Then, at midnight, I heard it. The soft patting of paws on the floor. Shadow appeared, but it didn't go for the food. Instead, it sat in front of me, its eyes locked onto mine. And then, it began to grow. It grew larger and larger until it towered over me. The air around us became thick with heat, and I could feel the ground tremble beneath my feet. It wasn't just a cat anymore. It was something monstrous. I backed away, but Shadow followed, its growl vibrating through my bones. I stumbled, and for the first time, I truly felt fear. I knew, without a doubt, that I was its next victim. But then, something strange happened. The growl faded, and the cat stopped. Its eyes dimmed, and it shrank back to its normal size. Shadow let out a soft, almost pitiful meow and rubbed against my leg like a common house cat. I reached down to pet it, but as my hand made contact, Shadow vanished into thin air, leaving nothing but a faint whisper in the air. The next morning, I found a note on my desk, written in shaky handwriting. "It's not the cat you should fear. It's what follows." That night, the nursing home burned to the ground. They said it was faulty wiring, but I knew the truth. Shadow was never the true danger. It had been trying to warn us, to protect us from something much worse. And now, it's too late.